Hello, how are you? Welcome back.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for letting me off for a while. It was important. Maybe 5 minutes or so because we already took 15 minutes with question answers. Wrap up what we did for the last time. Where did we end? It's been 2 weeks for us. So, Nahid, would you?
Sure. We talked about the consequences of Badr. We talk about Uhud.
Did we touch on inheritance that came in right after Uhud, the revelation for inheritance?
Is that the one about women
Yes.
being able to, and it was the first time in history? Yeah, you did touch on it.
Yes.
First time in the beginning, yes. Before
first time in human history and religious history.
Yeah.
Women were given legal rights to inheritance and property and their own property and their own essence, so to speak.
The right of divorce also was given to the women also, that they can divorce.
They can divorce, but that happened at another time. We were going through like when the revelation came around what happened. The inheritance happened right after Uhud because one of the early Medinan believers were killed, died, and his wife had 2 daughters only. And because there was no son in the family, all the pretty much all the religious laws of inheritance were same around. And so the brother of the deceased will inherit everything, being a male. So he came and took everything from them. So she came to Prophet Muhammad. She took her 2 daughters and came to Prophet Muhammad and complained about it and complained to God. So her complaint was sent up to God. People used to actually say that, she had respect in the community until she died, and said she's the one who God sent revelation for, especially, don't mess with her. And so the revelation came, and first time in religious history, women were given inheritance, and substantial. I mean, we do bicker about it in today's world, but as I keep on saying, that you always must see how much progress every chapter of God has made compared to what was happening elsewhere and outside. And we must compare all of the dispensations from that angle, right? So the daughters will have 1/2. If the son does inherit more. Wife inherits from 1/8 from the father, and the brothers of the male was given very small portion. So as soon as that revelation came, Prophet Muhammad sends for the guy and says, here's what God wants. And you can appreciate the obedience, by the way. So the guy returns immediately everything because he was just following his own law. Right. And there was some compassion in tribal society among some people, because we see like Hanafis and Prophet Muhammad's family and all that, they have a very different type of living and attitude with others. But in general, and that's why, I mean, our societies too, our modern societies, when you make laws and you make laws about everything, people actually feel justified just following the laws. Laws are not always ethical in the human society. Laws are not always even just, right? And human laws are not always just. They're legal, but they're not just. And I mean, I can write a book worth of our laws in the United States that are legal, but they're not just laws. But as soon as you make laws, then humanity feels somewhat as if they're justified in doing that. And so if you look at religion, then God's laws are just. When you truly look at them and dissect them for a human relationship with it, with a person and with community and society as family, they're just laws. So the inheritance is there. Then since you said divorce, let us touch here right now. So divorce was allowed in Judaism, of course, and at the time of Christ abrogated it because it was so abused, right? We don't touch it separately here, but when I teach at university, I dissected the whole Islam class into several segments, so to speak, like main issues, and one of them is the status of women in Islam. And when you really investigate what was happening prior to Islam there is a rabbi who writes, and I don't want to call out names, who writes that on the issue of what constitutes a divorce from a man to a woman. And he actually writes that if you don't like her cooking, you can divorce her, right? He writes that. He says, like, if you don't like her cooking, you can divorce her. Now, this thing was turned on its head in Islam, by the way. A woman was allowed to say, if you don't like his face, you can divorce him. But a man was said to be patient, right? It's amazing. And yet we actually condemn Islam for status of women, the way we see when we think that it's down. But the Quran is totally upside down to what was happening in the society, even to today's age. And I actually laugh about it. I often joke about it that, the women are preferred both in Islam and Baha'i faith, by the way, because, and people are like, oh, no, it's like, we are not just. The Baha'i faith is not just. Baha'i faith has favorites. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, women are favorite. I was like, how do you mean? Like, Baha'u'llah says, if you have money only to educate one child and you have a daughter and a son, who should you educate? The girl. Now, of course, I'm being facetious. It's not because of being favorite. There is just logic behind it, right? Because a woman is going to grow up and be the first teacher of the next generation. So you're actually gaining more by educating her, if you could only educate her. Then again, of course, he doesn't say that neglect the boys, right? So he says that because this is a duty of a father. In Baha'i faith, it's a duty of a father to educate your children, to pay for them, to educate them. And if the father only has money for one child and he has a daughter and a son, then daughter must be educated first. But the son becomes the responsibility of the community and the government, right? So it's not neglected, but so it's a priority set on that, even though it's a mandatory and binding that every child must be educated in Baha'u'llah's law. So it's quite amazing how much preference women were given in so many ways, and yet we don't really, of course, know the revelation closely and as the Guardian said, right? So we have done lots of biases, we have done lots of lies about it. Some of the communities do wrong, of course, but every community, there is people in every community that do wrong, and that's not the fault of the religion itself. So divorce was really abused, and the Christ abrogated that. So if you actually are a true Christian, which Christian communities are the highest in divorce rate today, right? So you're not following the laws of the book. Even though we kind of maybe say out loud how even what is it that truly and strongly religious we are, but we are not following our religious laws, then you're not strongly religious. So in true Christian community, marriage cannot be a divorce. But Christ did not put abrogation on polygamy, and this issue is not talked about much loud or often either. He abrogated divorce, but he did not say you should only have one wife. People did have as many wives as they could have had, historically speaking. Right? So, but whichever wife you married, you can divorce her. You can't set her aside till death do we part, right? So that's where that thing comes. And then by the time Islam came, then divorce was reintroduced with very stringent measures, which don't look stringent today, because again, we are looking at 1400 years after, and we're looking at some of the abuses that some of the Muslims have done, but it's not the abuse of Islam, right? So like you often, especially in India, this is a huge issue. Recently, there was a court case about it and all that too, that a man will say, I divorce you, and you're divorced, but that's not Quranic revelation, right? So you have to do that over 3 months, 3 times, according to the actual Sharia. So and even then, for whatever level of discrepancy is happening that you want a divorce, there are actually very stringent sort of injunctions in the Quran about it, that you must be patient, you must be this, you must be that. There is another issue that is, since we are on the women's issue, very much misquoted and misused, that, oh, if a woman does wrong, you are allowed to beat her because of whatever worse, which is not true, first of all. And I would say that, let's say if it even was true the way some of the mullahs read it, that, okay, so if she does wrong, it does not mean if she cooks wrong, by the way. The wrong that is talked in there is adultery, right? So if she has cheated on you, then the way the verses are to put your bed aside, don't like separate yourself, put her in a room. And actually the verses say that let her wait until God opens up some path for her. And if you cannot reconcile, then send her home, send her to her family or wherever she wants to go. This opposite of death by stoning in the Old Testament, okay? So what do you see in Islam? or what God is bringing, all right? And when we talk about death by stoning in the Old Testament, by the way, we should not put it down, because you don't want to consider that what is happening today. You do not want to consider a revelation that, oh, it's 5,000 years old revelation, okay? So what was happening around that those laws were considered? So Baha'u'llah has a beautiful answer to that. He says, God is the best physician of the world, right? So he sees what societal diseases you have. I'm paraphrasing. Baha'is are all familiar with the quotation, right? He is the physician. He is the physician of this universe and the world. I'll send you the quote. It's in Tabernacle. And he says that he decides, and sometimes he decides that if your body has cancer, then a limb should be severed. And you should not question it, because he's giving you the best remedy for your ills at the time, right? And so if we actually, then again, he says that if we actually, because every next revelation is a natural progression of the previous lesson, that's how we need to look at it. The way humanity started looking at it is as if the last one went wrong, and that's why I wanted to have the next one, and everybody started claiming to be the last one, and so forth and so on, because those are our problems and our mistakes. If we consider them, all of the dispensations, as natural progression, and I'm a first grader and now I need to go to the second and the third, we would not have suffered all of these ills. Because as soon as each revelation evolves us to that next level, that where now we are mature enough to not do these wrongs, the law of God changes. Right? It changes. He does not always treat me as if I'm 2 years old. As I grow, he gives me better things. He gives me easier things. He gives me relevant things to my age, to how I am dealing with life, right? So that's why it means that, he should not be questioned. That's not that he's some arbitrary power over there and send lightning on you if you asked a question. That's not what it is about. But he is only one who knows me inside out. I am his creation. He knows me inside out. He knows everything inside out, and he knows what of my actions will affect me which way, and he's concerned about my eternal life, not just little passage that we have here on this earth. So all the religion that we follow is actually for that safety of this passage, this little passage, this little tunnel we call earth and life here, that we have to cross this in a lots of tribulations, a lot of darkness, a lots of problems. And he's giving us these lessons and books to guide us how to pass safely through this planet, right? And so Baha'u'llah is very clear about it. And and Qur'án was very clear about it, and the older dispensations were very clear about it. But unfortunately, none of us really sits back and reads any of the books cover to cover, do we? We don't. We will become doctors and engineers and all sorts of things, and we'll spend 18 years, 20 years of my life I've spent in schooling. But when it comes to religion, it's like, oh, if I have time, I'll get to it, right? If I have time, I'll get to it. If somebody asks me to read half an hour to an hour every day, I feel oppressed. Well, that's so much. Right? And yet, if you're becoming a doctor 7-8 years in the college, you will be studying 24/7, pretty much, very little sleep, and you're willing to do it. Very hard books, very hard lessons, very hard words, and we don't think about it, right? So if any of the books we actually covered and we actually studied cover to cover, those who are against religion, period, let's say, they will pick their fingers and pick their stuff at, let's say, Old Testament. I don't find Old Testament not being as merciful as the Quran is, or as merciful as Bab and Baha'u'llah are. I only see the beauty in it. So you need to read that, all of it, first of all, in context, and know the history of the times, right? And know history of the times. That's why whenever any religion has been set up, you read Dawnbreakers, the Guardian puts a whole milieu of history. What is happening at that time? What is happening? Why this is happening? What are these other people doing? What are their problems, right? And so forth and so on. You study the history of the Quran, the Islam. The first thing we do is what? We go into tribal life of Arabia and see what they were doing. Because only then it makes sense for why these laws, why this stuff. What is it that you're lifting up, right? So then Baha'u'llah says very clearly that the prophets of God come to the darkest of people. The darkest of people, not one of the better ones. right? We always take pride that, oh, they came to us, maybe that's why we were more important, but that's not what the writings say. That's not what the scriptures say, right? So he says that you're the worst of the people, and God has sent you a message, and by that, he's lifted you up. And since he has lifted the bottommost people up, by the virtue of that, everybody gets lifted up, right? So it's really, really important. Anyway, so yeah. So on that, then you started from death by stoning to say maybe slap them somebody a little bit. Which one do you think is merciful? You should always see those things in those. And even though the actual real translators don't even translate it that way, and we'll talk about it some other day, but I still want to use use the worst case scenario, and even the worst case scenario is the best case scenario considering what was happening before. Yeah, so it's allowed, but it is said that it is most abhorrent. It's a most abhorrent thing that is halal, that is allowed. And Baha'u'llah uses a similar vocabulary. God does not like divorce. He allows it to you. Sometimes it's necessary, but he does not like it. So don't take it easy. He's not putting those of us down that had real hardships, by the way. You know, if you shouldn't feel that way. But he's asking us all to not just, just because somebody threw a sock in a wrong direction, don't walk away. And we do break relationships over small things now because we have become too loose with this thing. Right? So why was that? Is it important to God that I stay with my husband? I mean, it doesn't touch him, right? So what is the marriage for? The marriage is the basic family unit that is the core element of unity. If we cannot develop unity at that level, how would we be united as community and countries and nations and globe, right? It still is the basic level of unity. So we should be cognizant of it and not take things too lightly. And yet there are those who it's absolutely necessary. And God recognizes it and allows it and has mercy for that and compassion. So what else? Anything else that bugs you about women's issue we can quickly touch? Oh, and by the way, the inheritance is quite interesting. One of the rabbi writes that because women didn't have any right to anything, quote unquote, he writes and he says, what's his is his, what's hers is his, and what she finds in the street is his. All right. What does the Quran say? What you give her, what is her father's given to her is hers. What you give her is hers. What hers is hers. And what she finds is hers. And you, as a man or a husband, has no share in it, no legal share in it, unless she willingly gives it to you. Right?
Ghazala?
Yes.
Yeah, on the women's issue, I'm wondering, actually, on the other side, Khadija had so much wealth, and she seemed to have so much power in the society. So I'm always confused because at the same time, there was such terrible, you speak about how Islam uplifted the rights of women.
Yeah.
So how did Khadija have this position?
Khadija was widowed twice, and she had her own wealth that she actually managed. So let's say her, I don't know the details. I am speculating here, so take it with a grain of salt. So let's say in that society, I was a single daughter of a father who did not have any brothers or any male relatives. If he died, I will have his I will have his wealth. If my husband died and he didn't have any brothers to take it away from me, and I have sons, because she had sons, she has 3 or 4 sons from the previous both, 2 from the first marriage and 2 children from the second. So if she had sons, if this woman that came to Prophet Muhammad had a son, then the brother wouldn't have any right. The brother wouldn't have full right to that.
Oh, okay. So you had sons and you lost your husband.
Yeah, you got it from your male. You could have it if you had a male relative.
Okay.
You yourself was not your own person.
Okay, so Khadija had sons already before from her husband, so they couldn't take that wealth. It would go to her sons, and maybe her sons were still with her, or.
And plus, remember, yes, they were living with her. Actually, the Prophet treated them as his own children, right? So one of the very first martyrs of Islam was one of Khadija's sons, from her previous marriage.
Oh, wow.
Who was trying to save Prophet Muhammad from attack, and he was killed.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
And another issue
Great.
you always want to remember is that just because there is 1 or 2 or 10 people who got differently in a society does not mean that everybody was privileged that way.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right. And then again, another side that we will touch on that is Khadija was so rich. She was one of the richest women and among the top 10 rich families and stuff. And yet Prophet Muhammad lived most of his life very poorly. Why? The 3 years when they boycotted with them, by the way, those few that had wealth, it was spent on the community. That's how they survived those 3 years. So by the time they will come out of that, nobody had left anything. And then you migrated, of course, and you didn't even have your homes after that, right? So yeah, all of that wealth. Abu Bakr Siddiq was a very rich man. Most of his wealth was spent buying and freeing slaves who were becoming Muslims. So,
thank you.
All right.
Before you go on to our next section, I just want to mention at 7:30 I have to leave. We're having a devotional for a friend who has cancer. So I'll just leave and
well, our class should main class should end at 7:30 anyway, even though we didn't start yet, because half an hour after that is question answer. So, all right. So then these are the some of the other aftermaths of Uhud are that now that they've lost. Remember, after Badr, it was a dual sort of impression on society, community, and Arabian tribes. Some of them actually became more interested in Islam because this was considered if they were not with God, then why would God be helping them, so to speak? And so there was some real good teaching events that started after that. At the same time, there were others who became more afraid of them, and therefore those who were more afraid of them would want to attack more, right? So the battles and stuff really started erupting a lot more, and they were already happening as soon as they arrived in Medina, but they started happening a lot more after Badr, but especially after Uhud. So those now that were jealous, there's those who were afraid, those who were angry, those who were enemies, they all thought that this was a good time now to just kind of crush it all and get it over with, right? So life had become very, very difficult for Muslims. And not that every day was not difficult since its inception, but it becomes worse and worse and worse. Another development happened around this time that was so much more painful, so to speak, is that several times, several of the different tribes had created this ruse. By this time, they know that Muslims are so eager to spread the word of God among them, right? So their whole purpose of life is that their people should come to God and change their lives, teaching, right? So since they know that this is happening, there were a leader of one of the tribes comes to Prophet Muhammad, and whenever anybody came to him, he will invite them to Islam, right? So you often read in histories that, oh, so he called them to Islam, they said no, they go away, and it kind of gives a very sort of shallow impression, as if somebody comes to me and they say, hey, why don't you be a Baha'i? And they say no, and they go away, and I do something else. And how would you feel about that? It's like, so that's not what is happening. How do you teach? I mean, somebody comes, you invite them to faith. What happens? They ask question. You lay down the revelation in front of them, right? They will ask why. Why do you think this is the better thing? And I tell them, right? That's how I teach, right? So I quote them the writings of God, and I say, this is what God sends this time. This is how he wants us to live. This is how he wants us to love each other. This is what he wants to see, the glow, right? And you immediately see the very much higher level of living standards God has created than what we are suffering right now. So of course, then your heart is attracted. That's what they were doing. So when they come, they are sitting down. That's why they're sending teachers and stuff and all that teaching. What is it that God is saying? So if a woman is coming to you, so many early women are believers who got beaten by, some of them were slaves who became Muslims. And so when you say that, okay, if somebody said you cheated and somebody blamed you, 2 people blamed you for cheating, you were stoned to death. And here God is saying, leave her in her room and let God decide some way for her. Send her back home. Don't be harsh to her. Wow, really? So even if you interpreted that maybe, beat her a little bit, it still was like, oh my God, right? So who wouldn't be inspired to want to have that kind of progress in life, that you are as important as anybody else is, that you're a slave and you're as important to God as anybody else is. And actually the righteous slave is more important than an unrighteous master. Who would not be attracted to that, right? That's what God's look at. No black over white, no white over black, no woman over man, no man over woman, no Arab over Ajami, non-Arab, and no non-Arab over Arab. No one has preference in God. You're all created equal. Only the one whose character is better is closer to God. That's it, right? Which is achievable to all of us. That's an equal opportunity. Building a good character on path of God is available to every human soul. No, doesn't matter what your profession is, doesn't matter what your gender is, right? So forth and so on. So the tribe, one of the leader comes and he says that, I think my tribe is ready for, and Prophet Muhammad tried to teach him, and he doesn't want to take it. And there is no compulsion in religion. That's what Quran says, right? So same thing what Baha'u'llah says. If you have a good thing, it's incumbent upon everyone, right? Like you say, oh, Jehovah's Witnesses are teaching or Mormons are teaching. Baha'u'llah says everybody should be teaching. If you believe in a cause, if you sincerely believe that you have something good, it's your duty to teach it to your brother, right? So everybody must be teaching. And then we use wisdom and stuff and dissect things, and we should be able to have a dialogue and see where we want to go. What's the truth? So he says his tribe might be ready. So if he would send some teachers with him, maybe they can come and teach his tribe and they will become Muslims. So they were at party of 10 that was prepared to go do some other excursion. He was used to send parties out to just keep eyes on the roads, right? This is how so much more war was actually avoided. So they will know already what is happening. You'll meet them at their door rather than whatever, and so forth and so on. And it was so much of bloodshed was avoided this way. So when he requests that, Prophet Muhammad sends these 10 people with him. This was a ruse. And they actually took them when they reached closer to Mecca, where in the vicinity of where these tribes were. They actually handed them over. The Quraysh was waiting for them. These guys were taken out of Medina by a ruse, and these were not fighters. They were. I remember we said when the mosque was built, there was a side. It was used to call sufa. There was a little roof was put in there, and little side living quarters were put in there where homeless people. This is your first welfare society, by the way, in the history of mankind. So the welfare system was created under the Khulafas later, and so poor people were helped. And so the very, very poor, homeless type of early Muslims would live there, and Prophet Muhammad will feed them whatever he could spare and whatever he could have. And that's why he himself went so hungry so often, right? Like there's stories after stories after stories that in one of the Ramadans, like for example, a believer learns that it's been 3 days that the Prophet Muhammad did not have a meal, or his family. And so people will often send them food, and every time, especially in Ramadan, Muslims to this day actually are really, really hospitable, especially in Ramadan. So they will send food to each other, and food will arrive, and some other poor person was right at the door, and they'll give it to him and go hungry themselves, right? So we lament fasting and being hungry one day, fasting. I've tried 2 days without eating, fasting. And you pretty much imagine eating in that kind of environment where the heat and all of that is something else. So there are stories after stories. So these people, lots of these people became very top scholars in Islam because they didn't have, again, one of the other things I touch on is that we complain too much. Quran says that one of the problems of the human beings is that they're not grateful. We complain too much. We complain about everything. We're not grateful about everything. If you actually become a student of real history, one of the side effects is that you become grateful. We have come so far on all fronts, right? So now we are bickering about this, that, or the other, and the businesses and the people and the riches and the companies. Imagine a time when you don't even have work available, even if you want to work. There's not much going on financially, economically in a society where you don't have work. Hazrat Ali says sometimes he will go and dig somebody's ditches all day long. At the end of the day, they will give him a handful of dates, and that's the only payment he had. And he will graciously bring it home so his children and his wife could eat because they didn't have anything else in the house. Imagine that. Imagine that. This is the commander of the faithful, all right? This is the man that is loved the most after the manifestations. And here you are. This is the kind of environment they had at a time. So So these people then, because they were time-wise, they were so much more around Prophet Muhammad. And so they saw the revelations firsthand, they memorized them firsthand, they spend more time learning and deepening and stuff with the Prophet. They became, lots of them became very top scholars of Islam, early Islam. So these 10 were among, some of those were among those type of people. So the Quraysh are now then attack them when they come, and they climb up on a hill and they defend themselves. But they were outnumbered. So 7 of them are murdered and 3 of them are still alive. And the Quraysh then, remember Tabarsi was won over a ruse like this, write it in the chapters of the Quran, say, come out and we won't hurt you. And then when you come out, you get slaughtered. So they told the rest of the 3 that if you come out and stop fighting, we will not hurt you, we'll let you go back home, but come down and lay down your weapons. So they believed them, they came down, and they immediately started tying them up with their horses and stuff. And one of them objected, so they killed him. 2 survived, and they took them to Mecca, and they sold them to the 2 different families whose family members were killed either in Badr or Uhud. So these 2 were then killed by these families. One of them, and on that end too, the families will host these prisoners. They were prisoner for a little while before they killed them, for how many few days, whatever it was. And one of them, now some of these same people that were enemies at Sheikh Tabarsi became believers, or some of the believers were able to run away from these things. That's how we know the inner stories, right? So in every dispensation, that is the case. Sometimes if something has happened to your believers and later you learn what had happened, because that's how some of those people who were engaged in this kind of atrocity actually become believer later, and they say, well, this is what we did at that time, right? So one of them is hosted by this one family whose one of their relatives were killed in one of the battles, so they want to kill him for revenge. And this, even in pre-Islamic Arabia, this is considered wrong, because these people were not in a battle. They're not just captured into whatever things. It's deceitful. Nonetheless, this lady of the house says that one day he asked her to give him a razor so he could trim his beard, and before they will, as the last cleanliness or prayers and stuff and all that, because Islam says cleanliness is half your religion, right? Nisf of your iman is cleanliness. So the Muslims are really, really tight on that. So, so she says, she gave it to him, and while he had the razor in his hand, her baby a toddler ran up to him, and he grabbed him and held him in his lap. And she said, my heart just sank, because I just realized what had happened. He's a prisoner, we are going to kill him. I just gave him a razor, and now my baby is in his lap. And she said, I gasped, and he looked at me and he realized what had happened, and he smiled and he said, I'm not going to hurt your child. I'm not going to hurt your child. And she said, I've never seen anybody with that kind of character, with that kind of goodwill. And here he knew we were going to, first of all, they captured them by deceit, and he knew they were going to put him to death. He says, I've never seen anybody like that. And so after he cleans himself, he says, can I say some prayer before you kill me? And they allow him, and he stands, and the whole rakats, the 2 rakat prayer he does. And then he tells them that, I was so engaged with because Baha'u'llah says the same thing. Prayer is communion with God. You are actually in God's presence when you're praying, right? So he says, I was so into it that I wanted to prolong my prayer. It was so sweet, that moment. But then I was afraid that you'll think that I'm prolonging it so I could avoid my death. And I didn't want that impression on you, because I'm happy to go. I've fulfilled my purpose, he says. So they kill him. But those people who saw and listened to this, they became really intrigued. And so they started watching and investigating what is happening. The other one was with another family. And when they took him out to kill him, Abu Sufyan was among them, among the leaders. And he tells him, and he says, don't you wish it was Muhammad instead of you? If you didn't become a Muslim, then, you wouldn't be in this place. And, wouldn't you rather wish that it was Muhammad we were killing right now so you could have a happy life after? And the guy gets mad. I will be mad, right? So if somebody says that to me, and so he gets, the Muslim guy goes mad, and he says, what the hell are you talking about? You're saying that I will be happy that Rasulullah, the messenger of God, is killed instead of me? I will give my life to save him from a thorn that might hurt his foot. And Abu Sufyan says, Wallahi, I've never seen anybody loved like Muhammad is, right? And the same thing was said about Baha'u'llah, right? one of the worst enemies, the Wazir of the Shah, had said this to his son, because his son said that at one point, the Mirza Taqi's son said, I think it was Mirza Taqi's son, who said at one point to his father that Baha'u'llah has wasted his life, right? He was a son of a minister, and he was this top rich guy, and he could have had everything, and he threw it away for what he's doing, for his disfaith. And his father, who's the enemy of the faith and believers, said this, right? It's the whole quote is in the non-breaker. He says, not so, my son, not so. There is something about him we don't understand. But I'm paraphrasing, and he says, he's the one who is so loved by those who follow him, that in the midst of the darkness of the night, they will not embark on a wrong thing for the sake of his memory, right? For the sake of Baha'u'llah's memory. And that is true. He saves us from ourselves, right? It's like they will not do it. He says, who's loved like that? Who's loved like that in the world? Even he's not there watching them. He's not there. But they love him so much that for his love, they are kept from doing wrong in the midst of the darkness of night. Right? And so he says he has some great end to him that we don't understand, this guy said, right? So both of these stories and all millions of others have so much of then aftermath that people came that, oh, because of this guy. There was another guy who was killed, and when he was getting killed, he said he prayed to God and thanked him for achieving his purpose. And he said, I was amazed. I was like, who says that? So when I investigated, I learned that Muslims consider shahada, to being a martyr, the highest badge of honor. It's like, what is that inculcates this level of sacrifice inside you? And that's what brought him to the faith soon after, this other guy. So this incident happened. And then within this same time, before this news went to Medina, another tribe, 3 of them, representative came, and they asked for the same thing. And they said, their tribes are ready for Islam. If Prophet Muhammad could send them some teachers, then maybe they will all become Muslims. And 70 of these same sort of believers were sent out. And only 2 survived. They were all killed, and they were all slaughtered. So now the tribes are using these kind of ruses as well, while they're directly attacking and directly doing other things too. So it becomes really, really precarious. So within like very short few weeks, you lost 70 at Uhud, and within very few short weeks, you have lost more than 80 people just by this means, right? And especially these ones, some of them were, as I said, they were the top scholars of the time. You will imagine the sadness that this causes to the heart of manifestation of God. During this time, so when the second 70 happened, that murdering happened. The 2 that survived, one of them actually was, they thought he was dead, so he pretended dead, and they left him for that. And there were another 2 that were sent out to graze the camels, and so they weren't killed. But when they came back to the scene, one of them would not leave. He would not leave back to Medina. He went and confronted the people, and he was killed. So out of these 3, then only 2 survived. When these 2 were marching back to Medina, there were another 2 people from one of those tribes that were partially involved in this killing. They had come for some other covenanting deal with Prophet Muhammad, and they were returning back. And when these Muslims saw that, they thought that they were from the same tribe, and that they were, of course, you can imagine what amount of sadness and anger they had. They ended up killing these 2 people. So when they reached Medina, back to Medina, they're telling first of all, what had happened to Prophet Muhammad, and then they said that, oh, these 2 people we saw on the road, and we thought, they were from this tribe, we killed them. Prophet Muhammad really, really rebukes him and says these people had nothing to do with what had happened, right? So they weren't. So remember, each life to itself is a core element of all faiths, by the way, right? You are every life. There's just one life in this world that we are responsible for. Now, parents are responsible for children's upkeep until they're 15, right? But nonetheless, at the time of the end, when you stand in front of your Lord, or any of the rewards and the punishment that he levies onto us, it's on my personal merit, good or bad, anything, right? all the revelations in one sense or the other are quite clear about that, but so much so clear is Quran and our own writings that no one would actually be able to save you at the end or reward you, save you against your wrongs or reward you for somebody else's good doings. You have no part in it. My father is righteous, that's for him. My ancestors were this or that way, that's for them, right? I have no share in it. I have no share in their wrongdoing, and I have no share in their right doing. None. I stand alone by myself for my character. So this whole issue, so many issues in our societies that are erupting right now, it's like just so sad. I hate you because what my ancestors did to each other, right? How wrong and unjust is that? And we're doing this. We're doing it at so many different fronts. So
same advice was given by Muhammad to Fatima, and even by guardian to until Bahar.
Yes. Fatima was told by Prophet Muhammad that my being prophet would not save you in front of Allah, in front of God at the day of judgment. You will stand by yourself, right? And Ali has written the same stuff. Actually, there is a letter of Ali to Imam Hussein that gives me so much strength during the hard times, especially. And because his end was so miserable, right, in the worldly way. And here his father was telling him that don't ask for special things from God. He told that to Hussein. Just because you are my son, just because you are going to be this, don't ask God to give you special treatment. There are hardships in life that will happen to you just like they happen to everybody else. Just because you are this person, this entity, does not mean that those things are going to be away from you or you'll be saved from them. All of that is part of all of our lives, right? He was told that. And he actually was told not to ask God for special treatment. And so when I get really mad and I really scream and stuff, he reminds me inside there. I remember if Hussein was asked not to ask for special treatment, what the hell is wrong with you, right? So Prophet Muhammad really rebukes this person and according to the laws of the land, if somebody was wrongfully killed, then you paid the ransom, right? You paid the blood money, and blood money was set actually pre-Islamic as well. And after that, what did it entail? So he immediately gathers the blood money and sends the messengers to that tribe, apologizing for what had happened. It was a mistake, and sends this money out. Another rule of tribal life was that, remember, they had confederates, right? So in Medina, then all the previous two of the pagan tribes and all the three Jewish tribes were confederates to each other. Quraysh had their own confederates, as other tribes were their confederates, which meant that whatever good or bad happened, they shared that legacy in them. If war happened, they fought together. If something happened to one or the other, they actually were responsible for each other's security. So when one of you had to pay this blood money, then your confederate tribes actually were liable to a certain portion of it. They all got it together and gave it to the person. So there are two stories to this end. That one is that because of this incident, this blood money that was sent out, Prophet Muhammad with some of the believers goes to Bani Nazir, one of the Jewish tribes. One of them got out already, right? So the second one, and he asked them that they need to do their share because this pagan tribe that money was sent to were the confederates of Medinan society. So they say, okay, they invite him to sit down and wait somewhere, and they'll go and gather the money. You didn't have banks and checkbooks at that time, right? So people had their own cash, whatever they had in their homes, and who had whatever. So he says, okay. So he sits down by the shade of a house, and the Jews too were conspiring, right? Because the Quraysh were pushing them too, but many of them themselves were not happy with the progress of Islam or Prophet Muhammad, because some of it is, Baha'u'llah talks about this issue of jealousy that just desecrates human heart, right? And so it's like, okay, so we were more special and now you're not. One of the major jealous point was that, yes, they were waiting for a prophet to come. He did come exactly as it was told, but they were hoping that he would be Jewish bloodline and stock, and here he was from the Arabs whom they looked down at, right? A lot of our teaching work goes the same way too, by the way. People don't want Bab and Baha'u'llah to be from Persia. Okay? So it doesn't have a very good reputation right now, so they don't want it. and so forth and so on. Christ was asked the same way too. What good thing comes from Nazareth, right? Because he was supposed to be from somewhere else, and so forth and so on. So they were plotting and doing their own intrigues, as we talked about it. So they decided that since he was sort of in their vicinity and all that, how about if they devise some plan to kill him and get rid of all this problem altogether? Now that's, if another country, somebody's planning a murder to my president, that's a different type of crime. It's still a crime, and we'll punish them when we catch them. If we catch them, it's a different type of crime. If my own people are doing that, that's espionage, right? That's a very different level of crime. So
That's
yeah. So sorry, your voice got cut off. So
I said that's treason.
Yes, that's treason. Yes, that's treason. So they assign somebody who will take a big stone and go up on the roof to the wall, the shadow where they were sitting, and drop it on him, and accomplish it this way. So one thing that humanity does not understand is the station and who the manifestations are, right? I mean, we often see them just a little bit better than us, but that's not what it is. So anyway, when this guy reaches up to the roof, nobody knows, Muslims don't know, right? So Prophet Muhammad immediately gets up. There are a few incidents with Abu Baha's life like this. He immediately just gets up as if he just remembers something and walks away from the group. And so he's not there. And then a little while goes on, and the believers are like, what happened? Because they thought as if you just remember something and you stepped away. And so they get up and start looking for him, and they didn't find him all the way to Medina, right? So because the tribes are in the outer skirts of vicinity. If we were talking about in the other class, if you go to say very primitive sort of villages, you have a main body of village, but then you have this clan is settled there and that clan is settled there, and some of the houses could be almost a couple of miles away from the main segment, and yet the whole thing is one village. And so Prophet Muhammad tells them what had happened. And that's one story. There is another side story in history too, and either one is fine. Some other historians say that they actually called him for they used to call the Islamic society, still have that, as sort of manazara. We call it a sort of dialogue between two different people happening, and they send the same message because the other tribes were doing that we might be ready to accept Islam. We want you yourself with 30 of your companions to come and have this dialogue with us. If you can prove to us that your truth is truth, then we will be willing to accept Islam. And those historians say that it was because of this that he went with these believers, whichever it was, but they were planning to kill him. So that's then treason. So Prophet Muhammad then takes a certain amount of his believers. They go and besiege Bani Nazir. They ask them, they tell them, we know what has happened, and they ask them to, they were actually invited to regret on what they've done, apologize for what they've done, and reissue the treaties, and don't do this, right? They actually were so, by this time, because everybody was so boldened, they thought that, well, I mean, the Muslims lost, so we can take him. So they went inside their little whatever castle they had, and they closed their doors, and they said, no, we'll fight you rather. So then again, remember we read the course of Deuteronomy for what happens when somebody's besieged. We should read that at every interval. This was for a couple of weeks. Deuteronomy 20, chapter 20, verse 10 to 14. I've read this before, but it's worth reading it again. When thou comest nigh upon a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it, and it shall be, if it make thee answer of peace. So those three things that Muslims used to offer when they met the enemy, they did not create the enemy, right? They did not attack anybody. Somebody was planning to attack them and fight them, and when you reach that, you still offer them peace and ask them not to fight and have peace. Remember those three things they used to offer them? Either not have peace, accept Islam. If they don't, preach them, teach them. If they don't accept it, then at least become a reasonable citizen, pay the tax, become the citizen of Islamic State, and don't fight. If they take any of those things, then don't fight them. But if they do not take any of that and they're determined on fighting, then fight them. Yeah. So those are actually Old Testament laws. Remember, one of the prophecy of Islam was that it will revive Judaic laws, and lots of Islamic laws made better, but revived in one sense. So, and upon and open unto thee, but it's not just peace that they say, okay, then what was it? That they become tributaries. That's Old Testament. Right? So, and open unto thee, that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee. And if it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it. And when thy Lord thy God hath delivered it unto thine hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword, but the women and the little ones and the cattle and all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself, and thou shalt eat the spoil of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. And this was practiced and done several times in Judaic history to other people. Remember, in the Constitution of Medina, the Muslims ruled by the Muslim law, pagans ruled by the pagan laws, and Jews ruled by the Jewish law. This should have been their end. First time as well, the first tribe, and they asked for that we should be let go of with all of our belongings. We just want to live somewhere else. And he allowed them. He did not implement the law onto them. Remember that. This time too, when they realize that they cannot sustain this and they might not win it either, and this is not an end that could have any good stuff for them, they then asked that the same end that the previous tribe did, that they should be allowed to let go of. They will leave the area and settle somewhere else, and that all their belongings and everything they should be allowed to take. And Prophet Muhammad allowed them that again. It was talked about a lot at this point that the other Sahaba, who knew very well the Old Testament laws and what was the actual covenant of the Constitution of Medina, but he did not budge on that. So they were let go of. So they left couple of their leaders, and they left to the first tribe too. They were supposed to go outside of Arabian territories and settle there. And these guys as well, but many of them actually settle in Khaybar. You must have heard the name. It's another main city. So it was a Jewish city, actually, a settlement. And they go and settle there instead and start, of course, now, of course, they're angry. They're even angrier. So they start major intrigues against Muslims around the whole Arabia after they leave here. So that's your second tribe now. Right after this, Prophet Muhammad will hear the news that and in between, remember we had 95 different battles within like 8 to 9 years of time. So we are only covering the main ones. But if you look at if you start reading the actual history day after day, almost monthly basis, they're having an excursion or two. Average every 2 months, there is some major excursions happening. Sometimes the Muslims are so thinned out that they're sent out in 4 different directions to curb something that is happening and a danger that is coming towards Medina. So life is really difficult. So Prophet Muhammad hears that the Meccans are gathering another army. This time because now these 2 Jewish tribes, some of their leaders, especially the second one, there are other few tribes that I think we touched a little bit about it, that at this point the Muslims actually started certain amount of policing around as well. There was a couple of tribes that used to be like famous for being bandits, and they will wreak havoc in Arabia was very lawless land. So the Muslims actually started curbing these activities and brought peace into areas without ever touching them or bringing them to Islam or anything. So some of these people are now angry too because they don't have a free range to whatever they want to do. So they want to people are actually traveling around inciting each other and the gathering forces against Muslims. So the news comes that there is large force that is being gathered and they are marching against Medina again. They all thought actually this will be the end of everything, right? So again, the council was called, as was Prophet Muhammad's habit to do it. And this time again, remember last time he said we should defend ourselves from Medina, from the city, and the same thing was suggested again. By this time, Salman Farsi, was freed, was bought and freed. So he was freely with Muslims. And he had suggested actually that in Persia, because he lived his early life there, he said that battles, some of the cities will dig this trench around the city. And that was a extra sort of sense of protection, right? Because it was wide enough that you couldn't run your horses, and we didn't have the trucks and cannons and this and that at that time yet. So so he suggested that, and Prophet Muhammad then agreed with that. Everybody else liked the idea, so they had very limited time. So they had, maybe we should draw next time. I should draw the picture of Medina at the time, but so they were exposed on a major, like sort of, let's say 2 sides, right? So there was something else here, and then there was this last Jewish tribe that had a castle-like settlement in one end. So they were, and when Banu Nazir was besieged, by the way, they too were planning to attack and fight. So in the middle of that, Prophet Muhammad had left some of the believers to Banu Nazir, left to them, besieged them as well. They got scared and they actually renewed their treaty again. All of these tribes, if you actually look at all the history closer, day-to-day basis, they had renewed their treaties at least 2 to 3 times, each one of them, and they still broke them. Every time they'll break them, they were given a chance to renew the treaty and live peacefully, renew the thing and live peacefully. So then they remember and keep your constitution of Medina right there. One of the duty of everybody was to defend the city together. If the city was attacked, then they were supposed to defend the city together, all pagans, Muslims, Jews, whoever it was. So they are considering that side is safe. So they have this long trench to dig, and so Prophet Muhammad created the parties of Muslims, and they started digging. It's one of the very famous battles called the Battle of Ghazwa-i-Khandak, the Battle of Trench, or the siege, because the pagans besieged Medina. So they are digging. There are some of the very famous stories come out of this digging event. One of that is that they went. It took them a couple of weeks to finish it. It had to be deep enough and wide enough that the horse cannot jump on the other side, right? So so they're digging. Now in that place, you don't have refrigerators, you don't have Safeways and grocery stores to go just, somebody can go buy you things and you eat. If you're actually procuring your daily food, then you can imagine the stress of life to do any such things, or any of the battles they were doing, for how much economic stress it would have been bringing onto these people. And one of the famous story is that they went really, really hungry. And at one point, some of the Sahabas, some of the companions, they were talking to each other and saying, how they were like, I was asking the other class, I was like, have you actually went hungry so long and so much that it physically hurts, right? If you haven't, you don't know what I'm talking about. You really don't know what I'm talking about. Yes, we all fast and stuff, but that's nothing to do with what we're talking about, right? Try that once in your lifetime. It will humble you and give you lots of gratitude. It physically hurts when you go beyond a certain level and you're hungry and thirsty. And it's like it's physical pain. And there's time as if your whole focus goes on to, if I could just have food, and cannot think of, your brain cannot, because your brain's job is to procure for your life and take care of your body, right? So what the religious sentiment does is actually to gives you control over that brain, and you say, no, I'm going to rise higher than this pain, right? And I'm going to do what is right. So it's amazing sort of thing that it does when we become good. So they're hungry and they're showing each other and say, when you're really hungry, if your stomach, like press your stomach, that pain goes away for a few minutes, right? So, and we all have the habit of doing that. It's like, if you're really hungry, you kind of naturally kind of press your stomach with your hands. So they're showing each other, they were tying stones to their stomach so they wouldn't feel such pangs of hunger. And some of them come to Prophet Muhammad and are telling him that they're showing him that they were tying stones to their stomach, that they were so hungry. And he lifts up his shirt and he has stones tied to his stomach, right? Because he was digging with them. And one of the believers says that I just saw him and he was like, you couldn't like see him. He was like top to down. He was just slithered in dust, right? And mud. And he was so hungry and everybody was so hungry. He says, I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. And he asked permission by some ruse to go home for something quickly, and he was let go of, and he comes home to his wife and he says, you know, I saw him so hungry. I just can't see it. I cannot bear with it. Is there anything in the home we can do to curb this? And she said, well, I have a handful of barley flour, and we only own one goat. And he says, that's fine, you know, just make the dough and cook the barley, and I'll slaughter the goat. I just can't deal with this. She goes, okay. So he asks her for the initial preparations, and she tells him to go quietly and very quietly ask him to come and eat. Maybe a couple of companions he can bring with him, you know, because some of the people were always with him, like the first 4 caliphs we talk about. Those were like almost like permanent glued companions to Prophet Muhammad. Few other early believers, you know, there are about 15, 20 people that were always around him, unless they were gone out alone to fight somewhere. So he says few of them, maybe, you know, few of the companions can come with him, but it's not enough. So be very quiet and tell him very quietly. He says, okay, I'll do that. So he goes and approaches Prophet Muhammad and says, you know, Ya Rasulullah, I was like, I just couldn't see you. I just can't bear with, you know, seeing you in such pain and misery. And so my wife says that she has some food, and I just quietly want to invite you. Maybe you can grab a companion or two with you and come and eat. And so Prophet Muhammad thanks him first and then asks him how much food there is. And he says, well, a handful of barley, and we had 1 goat that I slaughtered. So Prophet Muhammad smiles and says, that's enough. And he stands up and shouts out to everybody, and he says, you know, so-and-so has invited us all graciously to go and eat at his place. And he's like, you know, so he's like really disturbed, and 1,000 people are digging the ditch. So all of them gathered up, and they were like, okay, let's go eat at his home. And Prophet Muhammad tells him, go run home and tell your wife not to start cooking until I arrive. Like, okay. So he goes and tells us, remember what we do to our husbands when they do wrong? I mean, that guy would have been slaughtered so badly, right? So she's so mad at him. It's like, she's like, I did. I mean, you know, you can't stop Rasulullah from, you know, doing this. I can't help it. He did that. So she waits for him. He arrives with 1,000 companions. And he prays on both of the things of the food they were cooking, and it has it that everybody ate, 1,000 people, and there were still crumbs left, and everybody was satisfied. You have these stories about almost every manifestation, especially the food story. It's quite amazing, right? Christ has a story of few fishes and loaves of bread that fed hundreds of people. There are 4 or 5 stories like this on this different occasion about Prophet Muhammad that of course even us would consider miracles. And so there's that. Then one of the second most famous story of Ghazwa Khandak, is that some of the believers can't come to him, and they say that they found a major stone in the way, and they can't break it, and they can't go any farther. So he comes, he's as weak and hungry as they are, and he takes whatever the pickaxe and stuff they were using, and he would always pray on everything. Muslims still do, right? So you'll say Bismillah for everything, no matter what you're starting. You'll pray with the name of God and then start this. So he hits it, and the you know, when you hit the rock very hard, the flints go out and stuff. And a major part of it breaks with these flints. And he says, God has just given me the keys of Persia. Right? That was a prophecy of Islam, right? It's a double prophecy, actually, because the prophecy already happened in Mecca as well. Remember, we talked about that the revelation came in Mecca, and during the time when they actually were boycotted, that the prophecy came of the Quran that the Romans will win. And Romans were really losing. And the prophecy was that the Muslims will win and Romans will win soon enough. And that happened during Badr. So right after Badr, news arrived, the Romans won a major territory and pushed back Persians. So he says, God has just given me the keys of Persia. And then he hits the rock again, another piece comes out, and he says, God has now granted me the keys to Yemen. And the keys to, I believe they were to one of the Syrian portions that were under Romans. So there were 3 major parts around the world that he prophesied at this point. And the hypocrites laughed their heads out at this, same as the pagan Meccans laughed their heads out at the first prophecy during Mecca, because in both times they are actually during the worst times of Muslims that they're finding themselves. They were like, really? Like you can't even, like, you barely are alive. And these people are coming and they're going to slaughter you. And the whole Arabia was told that they're going to slaughter all the men and rape all their women, right? So this became the common knowledge of everything. And here you are, you know, what are you talking about? So so anyway, so they finished the trench, and the army arrives. They actually first arrived at Badr. They thought Muslims will meet them out there or closer to Uhud or on the path, and they didn't see anybody. So they arrived all the way to Medina, and here they see this trench dug up, and the Muslims had picketed fences inside on the city side. Women and children were left inside the city, and all able-bodied men were here. So there were, at this point, there are 3,000 Muslims. So it's double the number, more than double the number of Uhud, but nonetheless, it's like, it's a thin line. You don't, and plus they're so small in numbers, considering to how much territory they're now trying to cover, that they don't have any relief work, right? So here, when you have 24/7, even to this day, battling, then you have, okay, one regiment is doing it, that they go and sleep and rest, and the other one is coming, and so forth and so on. There is no backup. So these, and plus they were digging all the time before the army arrives the next day. So they're in terrible shape, and there are Quranic verses about it. Remember when it was so tight that your heart rose to your throats. You're so afraid that your hearts rose to your throats, and God sent you help, right? 10,000 Meccans show up on the borders of Medina. All the major tribes, either fully or participants from them. Several of the Jewish tribes are with the army. And Meccan Arabia has never seen anything like that. They will see that soon enough among Muslims, but they've never seen anything like that before this event. You can imagine how many thousands of horses and how many thousands of camels, and so it was one of the largest events of history up till this time. They had really rough time. It lasted about 3 weeks, and you are out in the desert as well, right? So and desert is not very good and forgiving for when it comes to cold or heat or weather or whatever is happening. So this is 5th year of Hijrah, by the way. So it's just about 4.5 years they're here, and this is they have dozens of battles, and this is major war that they're facing, the Muslims. Several times, several of the Meccans actually were able. There was a certain part of the trench that was not as wide or as deep, and they were able to cross it, but no major damage was done. I think total of like 3 pagans died and 5 Muslim died in this whole battle in 3 weeks because of the whole strategy that was actually put in place and actual obedience. It had a very small level of bloodshed. Towards the end of it, the last week of it is that now the animals, the Quraysh's animals have started dying because they're not used to this kind of battle stuff, right? They've never done this before. They weren't planning, they weren't expecting to besiege anybody. So no matter how much forage you bring, whatever else is around available, with that level of an army, and food alone becomes a really hard stuff. So lots of animals started dying of hunger, and the camp was in real bad shape. Towards the end, one of the evenings, one of the believer writes that, and then it started a storm. A storm started that was of such severity that they had never ever remember anything in their memory. And it was so, the wind was howling as if like it was ripping up the tents. And it was so cold that you like their teeth were jittering and their limbs were jittering, and they could not even breathe. And he said in the middle of the night, Prophet Muhammad had called out and said, is there anyone around? And he said, we were so just like dying under this whole thing and hungry for days at this point. He says nobody wanted to answer, which is very unique, by the way, because Muslims will do anything to just answer. And he said he called out a couple of times and nobody answered. And finally called one of the guys' names by name, and he says, are you around? And he says now he couldn't say no. So he went up, and he says he couldn't stand, he couldn't even talk, he was shivering, this old being was shivering. And he says the Prophet of God took my head in his hands, and kissed it and rubbed it. And he says, you'll be okay, you'll be okay. And he says, all at once you felt like you were in a warm room and nothing was happening. So Prophet Muhammad tells him to go slip into the army camp from the trench, go inside, go on the other side, and just report back to what is happening. Now, to us, I mean, there must have been some revelation where he knew what was going on and wanted to confirm it. So the guy says, so he slips out and he goes on the other side, and he said that I never felt so warm ever in my life. The whole thing was gone, and he was like, he was good, he was fine. And he says he goes on the other side and he sees Abu Sufyan, who is the leader of this whole 10,000 army, by the way, and everybody else is under him. He says he was trying to revive one of the fires. All of their fires had gone out. The wind was so cold and harsh, and their tents had blown out. And he says he was standing there, and he says he was so close to me that I reached for my bow. I could have actually killed him right there and then. And he says, I just touched my bow, and I remember that Rasulullah said, don't do anything. Don't attack anybody. Don't call out anything. Don't do anything. All I want you to just see what is happening, come back quietly and report back. That's all. He goes like, I remember that. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to be, obedient to my orders. And he said he was so close, he could hear him. And Abu Sufyan just started telling his people to wrap up the camp and just leave. And he says, as long as I'm concerned, I'm just gone. And before he could finish his sentence, he says he ran up to his camel, righted it, and they used to tie the camel's legs so they won't run away. He says he didn't even remember to cut off his camel's the ties, and he just took off and shouted some commands on the other, like Khalid bin Walid and some other people who were in the army as commanders, and asked them to wrap up everything and sweep up the army and just go, and told the tribes to go home. And they left. By the time the sun rose, they were all gone. Right? And Prophet Muhammad said at this point that now they will never raid us again. Now we will go and take them. And that was it. And that prophecy too became true within a very short time. During this battle, one of the worst things that happened to them was not all of this that was so bad, but the leaders of the second tribe that have gone and settled in Khaybar, they were with the army. They were with the attacking army. And so one of them, who had relationships with other tribes and all that and everything, he had sent messages to the last tribe, Banu Qurayza, and he asked them to join hands with them. And they were afraid, and because they've just renewed their treaty as well, and they have seen what had happened to the other two tribes, what had happened. And so initially they sort of tried to resist, but he was persuasive. And he had told them that this is it. I mean, the whole Arabia is outside, is on the outside. So this is it. This is your chance, to do what you all along wanted. He was able to convince them, and he actually stayed with them inside the castle. And some of the younger elements, actually, there were some of the young ones, a couple of people that really, really hated this, and they tried to warn their tribes not. This was treachery. This was treason. Don't do it. It's against ethics as well, not just because you hate somebody or you have, right? It's really wrong ethics. So they accepted their offer, and they actually sent a couple of attacks onto the women and children in Medina. They were not successful, but they tried their part. One of the other things happened. One of the pagans who were passing by, because I was talking about in the other class that, you didn't have TV and newspapers who are keeping you abreast of what is happening out there. Some of the people who weren't involved in the war wouldn't even know that the war was going on. So somebody who was kind of passing by saw this, and he knew this Jewish tribe. He wasn't a Muslim. He goes and meets with them, and he learns their plan. And much later, he will become Muslim, and that's how too we know some of the very inner details. So he meets them, and he warned them. He says, "This is a bad idea. You have a treaty with these people. This is your city, and they're in the middle of this most horrible thing. You should be careful. You should not do this. This is not right." And so they were used to be quite angry and whatever insults they had for Muslims and stuff. And so he asked them, he says, what if they actually win? I mean, nobody thinks that Muslims can win. I mean, this little thing, 10,000 of these warrior tribes on their borders, who thinks that they're going to win? It's like, but what if they win? I mean, they did win Badr. Yes, they lost Uhud, but they did win Badr. and the odds were pretty bad. And what if they win? What would become of you then? So they are a bit concerned. So he asked them, he says, and the other thing is, I mean, like, what makes you so sure that the Quraysh actually, that if that happens, that the Quraysh will come and rescue you? Would they stand with you? If the Muslims win and you're committing treason, then do you think Quraysh will help you? So he suggests that they should, to test the Quraysh's sincerity, and he asked them to ask Quraysh to send a couple of their people as hostages, so they can be living in the castle. So just say if the battle goes sour and the Quraysh lose, then they can't just run away, because their people are here with the Jews, and they will have to stay and help you. So he said, well, that sounds good. So then he leaves them and he goes to the Quraysh and he asks them, he says, so you are depending on each other. So what if this thing goes sour? Then what would happen? What if the Jews will learn that, you are not sincere, and they will actually join hands with Muslims? Now, the Jews were not asked to go and fight this battle. They were asked to just defend that side. That's all, right? So then what would happen? What if they come from the hind side and attack you? What would you do? So he suggests the same thing to them. I mean, he was actually kind of creating some trouble for them at that point. But so the Quraysh do the same thing, and both simultaneously ask each other. They send messengers to each other, and they ask each other for hostages. That made both sides really sort of uncomfortable, because that showed that they really didn't fully trust each other, right? So when the battle finally ends, the Muslim army reaches back to city, because it would have been a little bit outside where they had the trenches and stuff. And Prophet Muhammad said that the revelation is that they should not rest, and they kind of guessed what was happening. So they had asked them to just clean up as much as they could. Lots of people are wounded quite seriously. And Asad bin Muaz, who is one of the very first believers, remember when the entry by troops happened in Medina, the very first one? He was one of the leaders that were angry at Musab for teaching, and he taught him, and then he taught his whole tribe, and that tribe became Muslim that same day. He was wounded very, very deeply. He had some relatives, he had some relation with this tribe, actually, because some of them used to intermarry, right? And so he had a stepbrother that was from them, and he had some relations with them. So they had this confederacy with this early believer. Prophet Muhammad takes the same people who had just finished this and goes and asks Banu Qurayza what and why they did that. One of the believers were actually sent before the army goes there, unannounced they didn't know why, and they didn't think that they knew what had happened already. So he was able to ascertain actually what they had done, and he had discussed with them, and they openly at that time said that, they didn't care, and they wanted things to go back as they used to be. So when you actually get to the truth of all of this, none of any single thing has ever happened before, no matter how truly a news would arrive to Prophet Muhammad, he will not act upon it without actually investigating. It's just amazing, right? And that's what we are asked to always investigate, right? See with our own eyes and not with the eyes of others is a first-hand investigation duty laid upon us. So this too was happening that way. And then, so they come and besiege the tribe. It again happened, I think it took 25 days. So they're just coming back out of a very hard battle for 3 weeks. At this point, this tribe, however, ironically, because the last two just made a demand, and which was totally out of their own faith and law, but that demand was granted them. These people actually sent a demand, and it was really sort of strange. And their demand was that they will not accept Prophet Muhammad's ruling of what should happen. They didn't want him to decide what should happen to them. So he asked them who they wanted to decide, and they actually called for Asad bin Muaz. It says they will ask him to decide what should happen at this end. So Asad bin Muaz, who was pretty much from his wound, he was almost on his deathbed. He was called in. He was actually brought in on a stretcher, for whatever kind of stretcher they used to build. And when he arrives, he actually asked both sides that whatever his verdict would be, they will honor it, from the Jews and from the Muslims and Prophet Muhammad. And that he was given the promise that whatever his verdict is, it would be implemented. He decided that it was high time that Jews had their own law implemented onto them. Do we remember what happens in Deuteronomy 20? So that was his verdict, and it was a hard one. So all the able-bodied men were put to death. Khaybar, some of the families and women and children actually left and settled in Khaybar with other Jews, which was still intriguing and doing. And a little bit after, a year or two after, I think it was, Khaybar was finally taken as well. The leader who had incited all of this, who is from the middle tribe of Banu Nazir, he was killed in this. He was in the castle. He was with them. He was with Confederate Army, and he was an enemy of them, and he was with these people. When Khaybar fell, it was his daughter that will become one of the mothers of the believers, Safiya. And she was the one that famous stories about that people used to, somebody mocked her for being a Jew, and Prophet Muhammad saw her, she was crying, and he asked her why, and she said somebody called her a Jewess, which was a drug, once, they meant to insult her. And he said in tears that you should tell them, anybody who speaks to you that way, you should tell them. She actually had a direct lineage back to Harun, alayhi salam, the brother of Moses. And he told her that if anybody ever said any such things, you should say to them that my father was a prophet, because her lineage went back to Harun. My uncle was a prophet, and my husband is a prophet. Which other human being has that station and position? So there were many of them who were spared, in spite of the promise that the verdict should be implemented. And finally, some of the believers complained to Prophet about this, that whoever was asking for any amount of mercy, he will give it to them. So they complained about it, that you said the verdict should be implemented. And he said, yes, I'm not coming in that way, but God has given me a duty of mercy. And if somebody comes for mercy, it's my job to give it to them. You can't stop me from that. There was one of the guys who was, his friend asked that his life should be spared. One of the Muslims asked that his life should be spared, and Prophet Muhammad said, okay. So he was brought the news that he's free. And he said, I don't want to go because, my family is not free. And so the person comes and he says, he doesn't want to accept the freedom because his family is not free. And Prophet Muhammad said his family is free. So they were all free. And then he still says that when the news was given to him, he says, what would I go? If everything is taken from me, then how would I live anywhere? And how would I survive? So it's not, so Prophet Muhammad was told that that's what he's saying, and everything that belonged to him was given to him too. There is a story that somebody actually was quietly sent to the other people and said that because if they asked for it, then he would work as a chief magistrate still, even though it was not his verdict, and he promised that this will happen. And those whoever asked for it, they were given their freedom. There are several of these people from all of these three tribes that actually had become Muslims before or after. And so we have them as early companions. One of the very top rabbis of the time had become Muslim later, and he actually was in the armies fighting for Islam, both in Syria and Persia. Salman Farsi himself, by the way, was with the army when Persia was taken, if anybody was curious. So he did go back his native lands with the Muslim armies. And that was much later in Umar's time, of course. The Quraysh were quite broken after this, and they never actually came back they intrigued other tribes, and there were other wars that happened with other tribes. There were other wars that happened with so some of the Jewish tribes, but the Quraysh themselves never really came back to this. Right after this would be the Sulh Hudaybiyah, the contract of Hudaybiyah for peace between Quraysh and Muslims, and we start with that next time. I took a little bit extra time, and I'll open it up for question answers.
Ghazala,
Yes.
is in Islamic this thing we are used to say for each and every time Bismillah. What advice is given for us now?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Muslims say?
Yeah.
Well, most of our praise to God is Allah Abha, right? Allah Abha means God is the most glorious. Muslims had a couple of things. They'll say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, they will say, or just Bismillah, or they'll say Allahu Akbar. That was the more common way of calling out God, and we use Allah Abha. During the Bab's time, there were 5 different invocations that were used, and this one was finally picked up by Baha'is, and it became most common. So that's what we mostly use. But we don't have those similar rituals that Muslims had, right?
Instead of saying Bismillah, we have to say Allah.
We say Allah Abha, but Baha'u'llah is actually, there are a few things. First of all, Baha'u'llah is actually forbidden to mumble God's verses in public, right? So we don't have those similar habits where you always are saying out loud some praises and other people can hear you or something like that. Most of what we do is within our own hearts, privacy of your chambers. So if you're like saying, like you will still see like Muslims going in the streets and rolling their prayer beads, right? That is forbidden to us. You cannot recite the verses of God out loud in public unless you are in a prayer session, and of course you're saying prayers together. That's different.
No, my dear, day in and day out, we were used to say, suppose of feeding water we say Bismillah.
Yeah.
For anything. So is it what advice?
I don't have any personal advice, of course, but the faith actually calls for not turning worship into ritual. That's what my understanding is, right? Not turn worship into ritual, because when you ritualize things, that's where we actually went bad. We seem to pray a lot, but we don't act and have the actual righteous character that the Quran is calling for. So we are actually asked not to get into that kind of mode. Yeah. Not to get into that. And yet Abdul Baha says you should remember God 24/7, all your waking hours. Whichever ways you want to. Whatever pleases your heart, that you should be conscious of him all the waking hours. And by the way, if you're conscious of him all the waking hours, you are conscious of him in sleep as well. It doesn't go away. Right? Your sort of whole soul revolves around it. What's her name? Lua. A story about Lua. Once she enters and to talk to Abdul Baha about something when she was in Akka. And I think it was Yunus Refruchte who puts this story in 9 Years of Akka. And he says she entered and she was so radiant. It's like, it almost felt like light was coming out of her, right? She was very much into prayer and very much into, she's one of the apostles of Abdul Baha, right? And Abdul Baha smiled and said yes. And then he commented something. He says, but it's not sustainable. It's something that we do not sustain consistently. And I can give witness to that. It's like, I don't know why, but I have my personal take on it. Take it with a grain of salt, for what I've seen, at least from my experiences. It is that you get there and then you sort of, life solidifies in a very different way. But this whole life, and these are my words, only my experience, please take it, as I said, take it with a big grain of salt. What I understood for how it happens to me, that without further hardships and without further distances, you don't learn to run faster again to reach him. That's what I've seen. So I have witnessed that no matter how hard you work, and you get into that mode where he's with you 24/7. It's like, literally, I mean, yeah, you do all of those things, you work, you live life and all that, but he's every breath he's with you. You remember him. And then it's a very different sort of I don't know, I can't describe it in words. It's something else happens. Something else happens. But then something else happens and it goes away. There is after Haifa, I used to say within a few months after in Haifa, I actually regretted that. I wish I didn't go to Haifa. And I mostly don't tell this story, but I regretted, I wish I didn't go to Haifa, because I was 6 years old Baha'i when I went there. And I longed for it every single moment of my life. I can't describe it, the longing of your heart. And then all at once, the kind of things and whatever was happening and all that, there was this lull inside. And to this day, I long that longing that was inside me. I really long that longing. There's a you know, Bulleh Shah, one of the Sufi poets of subcontinent. I understood that after this event. I've read this very young age. It's some of my favorite poetry, but you don't understand the essence of things some of these people have spoken until you kind of have some experience. And he says that people always pray that they go to heaven. People pray that, I've never had, by the way, never really cared for it. He says people pray that they go to heaven. People pray that their faith is kept intact. Why don't they understand that what they need to ask God is to keep my longing alive? There is that light and beauty in that longing. And so whatever you can do, try to save that one. Try to save that one. It's he says that's all I want. That's all I want. There's another one that I used to love very much from very childhood, and I never understood until this event. And he says, I don't want to achieve the goal. I don't want to go to the Kaaba. I just want to long for it. I want to die longing for it. I don't want to get there. And he asks somebody, he says, I am on the path though, because I do want to go, but at the same time, if I get close, just kick me off. Kick me off, don't let me get there. I do long for him, but in a very different way. But I understand what Abdul Baha said. It was like that state is, and I'm sure Abdul Baha spoke about it because he would have witnessed it himself. That state is not permanent. It's, and I think if it was permanent, and that's just my lessons, could be totally wrong. If it was permanent, next level of longing and experience and understanding is not possible. You kind of would be just then stay there, right? It's when you read the Seven Valleys, that last one of the nothingness does not come easy. Right? What is nothingness? You actually have nothing left in your heart. Neither love nor hate, Baha'u'llah says in the Igan. You don't understand that until you get to that end. What does that mean? Because even love of Baha'u'llah and love of our own writings, right? Am I really sure that what I'm loving, meaning what I'm understanding, is actually true understanding? How would I get to the next level? How would I get closer to? If it's an ocean that I never conquer, then wherever I'm at, there are further stages. Do we want to be content with the second floor of the house? Do you want to keep on rising? right? And if you want to keep on rising, then hardships and stairs would be inevitable. It's inevitable. And life is custom made, right? I often say God has so much time on his hands, of course. It's custom made for all of us. We have different journeys, different things that are our challenges, and those challenges get challenged during our time of longings and during our time of being away. I mean, he's always there, right? So, but I often think that, I know we can't go back, but I often wish I had had that longing. The beauty of it was, I don't know, it's something else. And I think, to me personally, that's how I understand that last sentence of the Seven Valleys. And he says, it actually hit me very hard when I first time read that. And so after all the journey, after all the findings and all the learnings, he says, you finally come to your goal when you come to the manifestation of God, right? He says, you finally, you think you have achieved your goal. Bala says, but for this events and soul, that is but the beginning. So anyway, yes, we are asked to be in a sense of mode of prayer 24/7. Prayer is something that rises from within, not just the one we obligatorily do. That prayer, in my understanding, the one we do every day as an obligation, is actually to finally get us to that stage where you're actually now communicating from inside directly. Right? Where Abdul says, where no words are left, no syllables, no sounds. It's an inside condition that is then, it's just a mode of prayer all the time. God is with you all the time. He's with you. The word of manifestation, his care is with you all the time. But this world was built in such a way too that we will keep on fluctuating back and forth. That I believe that fluctuation is for further heights of understanding, I believe. If you don't get lost, there's that chance as well, of course. And so for me personally, if I would truly answer you just for my own personal self, read everything Baha'u'llah's given. And even though if you love every word of it, which we do, some of it is more dear to you than others. There are things that will just, it's custom made. It talks to you. Memorize those. Remember them every moment of your life. But don't stay there. I think lots of times when we just pick up certain things and only stay with that, we miss all the rest of the revelation. And with the add of life, years, and experience, other words of his become a lot more clear than that weren't clear before. And there's other beauties in there that you didn't see a few years ago that you can see now. Further understanding that you see now, and that's what the closeness to him is too, right? Understanding. The word of God is for understanding, and it's understanding that raises us. So I will say, just read everything and build a relationship. It stays with you. Create in me a pure heart is my favorite. And the ablution prayer of safety. And other than that, pick the writings that counter your challenges. We all have our own challenges, right? Only you know that. And God knows that, and only you know that. So those that you feel hurdles, those you feel challenges, that will help you remove those. Say them and use them every day. But it has to be private. It has to be private, not what we turned it into last time. because there's danger in that. It's we have seen a lots of danger in the world from that. Righteousness needs to be inside and hidden. It's not for display. Displayed righteousness becomes shackles. It's dangerous. All right. Anything else? Sorry about my rant.
Another this thing, today it is clear. Up till now, I was under the notion that this lineage, name of father, goes from father to son. But today, I just came across another picture. The lineage is more from daughters.
From anyone. See, in God's world, like now in this time when Baha'u'llah has spoken so clearly, human beings, what is special about us is our soul, not our body. Our body is just another animal version, right? We are not special because we walk on two legs. We are special because of the spirit, the soul that is given to us. And Baha'u'llah has clearly told us, and now we can see that all the way back in Genesis in the Old Testament, that we didn't understand, that soul has no gender, right? Soul has no gender. So even though we did consider, culturally speaking, that, or whatever, that bloodline is from the father, but in Prophet Muhammad's case, his bloodline comes from his daughter. So does Shoghi Effendi, right? Shoghi Effendi is not son of a son, he's son of a daughter. Abdul Baha didn't have sons. Yeah. And these things shouldn't matter to us. They don't matter to me at all, actually. I'm not into this business at all. If it's a woman should be this or man should be this, because God said it doesn't matter to him. The one who is righteous and close to him. That's it. Don't care. It's an accidental stuff here. There are things in me, being a woman, I will not give up. I'm grateful. And if I was a man, I'll be grateful. Never wanted to be something else. And neither do I look at a man lower than me or me higher than him. We both are servants of God and hopefully try to do our best to fulfill what he's asked us to do. All right, friends, unless you have anything else.